mentioning G.S. Ghore, and he said it's important to be an Indian first and then a sociologist. I'm also thinking that it's, when sociologists are writing, it's also the times that they are in, the Department of Sociology was established that time, and after independence, nation building was happening. So somewhere in their writings, the times are also reflected, and also the social positioning of the writers are also, that's also visible. So whether we say that it's, they are only talking of a certain community, or do you think that sometimes the social positioning of the writer also comes in their writings?
Yeah, I mean...
Can I just add
Sure.
to that? So, one of the things that I was wondering, like Charu, was really that what if one builds in an idea of time to this narrative? Will things, both in terms of understanding, not justifying, but locating what people were saying, but two is a sense of time in terms of the idea of nationalism. Today, when we talk about, the relationship between disciplines and the state, when we talk about what is going on, the story of higher education, for instance, what is the idea of knowledge production, then there is a very different idea, maybe. Is there? Would you think that there is a very different idea of nationalism? So do you think that nationalism is one thing, or do you think that in fact we have to bring in a temporal understanding of nationalism?
Concept of time. So if you look at our present from a Hindu notion of time, this is Kali Yuga, okay? And it doesn't have a precise point of beginning and a precise point of end. Likewise, Rahat Indori, who died during the COVID, so he described Gujarat 2002 as a Qiyamat, which is the end point of time from a Muslim perspective. Okay? What I'm saying, these are just two examples. India is very heterogeneous. We, or at least I, do not know what is the tribal notion of time. So the time of the nation state, right, and the time that people experience and live, they are not necessarily the same, right? So for example, what happened in 2002, you can describe it as pogrom, riot, and whatever, but for the survivors, it is Qiyamat. It is like end of the time where things are upside down, right? And likewise, you will see in our everyday conversation, when there is a corruption, people meet with betrayal. Many Hindus say that Kali Yuga mein to yahi hoga, right? Now, my point is, the notion of time that people live by, and the notion of time that nation-state crafts, okay? Of course, nation-state is not something which comes out of nowhere or it falls from the sky. It is also, of course, socially produced, right? So when we think about time, and historians, so the most popular one in the case of India, as you know, this is something which did not exist before. This is Eliot and Dowson, who created this threefold classification in the historiography of India, saying that there was a Hindu India, then the Hindu India, and the Muslim India, and then British India. So this is also a temporal division, right? Now, this notion of time, right? But you see, Reinhard Koselleck, the famous German historian of ideas, he also talks about. So now there is something called futurology. This is a subdiscipline in itself. People want to plan about the future time. Now, much of this in management, it is about managing time. But in the so-called pre-modern times, for Christians, for Muslims, for Hindus, also there is something called prophecy time. अब ये कल्कि के अवतार आने वाले हैं, ये आने वाले हैं, लेकिन ये ऊबर का टाइम नहीं है कि you will reach at 2:30 p.m. right? वो आने वाले हैं, वो आएंगे. You don't know. The Masiha will come, So these are prophecy time. Now the secular Western notion of time is one among many ways in which people have made sense of time, right? But I think I do not find the mainstream historians' usage of time, because it is built on this tripartite division of past, present, and future. Okay? And as it is well known, one of the things which Foucault did through Nietzsche, especially in the genealogy of morals, that what is the difference between genealogy and history? Because the reason I'm bringing history is because it is based on this division of time, past, present, and future. So unlike historians' way of saying that, okay, you want to understand 18th century, and then your assumption is that you go back to those so-called sources, right? But Foucault's intervention was precisely that genealogy is an inquiry from the present to the past. I mean, I think historians may not say this in public, they also do the same thing. But in order to shield themselves, that, theirs is an objective history, they say that no, they are not moved or influenced by the present. But of course, by the way, if you read, there is a wonderful book by Abul Kalam Azad called Ghubar-e-Khatir, and he doesn't agree with this threefold classification of time. He says that present doesn't exist, it is so fleeting. Okay? So he's not saying that I mean, there is a present in the sense that we are in this room, right? And we are having conversation, but it is so fleeting. And he says that the two primary criteria is simply past and future. It is so ephemeral, or what, I mean, Guthrie Spivak has this phrase which is called the vanishing present. So, of course, the social background and other things affect. But the point is, this is something which might be called sociological truism. So you will find very few people who may disagree with you. But the point is that once we understand it, do we see it as peculiarity of certain founding fathers of discipline? Or do we see it as something which is distinctive of the 40s or 50s or 30s? Or is there a pattern, okay, which also informs, not simply informs, but, powerfully shapes? So my method is genealogical because, I mean, I didn't say this, but probably let me say this. So when the Prime Minister said on the floor of the Parliament, 1400 saal ki gulami ya 1200 saal ki gulami, right? This is on the floor of the Parliament. Now, this political discourse is already prefigured by Radha Kamal Mukherjee, by G.S. Ghurye, by N.K. Bose. Okay? Now, I'm not saying in the ditto sense, but in terms of that notion of time. 1200 saal ki gulami. Right? So, let's enjoy our freedom now.
Why don't you keep it on this side, please? Yeah, because.
Sir, my name is Salim and I am pursuing a PhD from Political Science Department. My question is with regards to the critical analytical device of methodological nationalism you have used, which seems to be like heavily relying on the definition of or the idea of nationalism given by Anthony Smith. In fact, there are ideas of nationalism which later on Ben Anderson and others have detailed who discuss nation as an imagined community, or even Eric Hobsbawm who discussed nation as an invented tradition. So if we supplant those definitions within the category of, within the analytical device of methodological nationalism, do you think that the analysis, the critical analysis which you have undergone in this paper would somehow be as organic, or would it would we come to a different analysis where we can argue that the sociologists and the cataloging is actually constructed through the discipline rather than being organically derived from the civilization unit? If that makes sense.
Yeah, so one term to describe your question is conjectural. वो होती तो यूं होता, तुम होती तो ये होता, right? Now, I think, I'm not sure to what extent a scholar, you remember that song, and maybe you guys are too young to what was that film, Silsila or something? Right? So my point is not that conjectural questions are not relevant, but probably when you are saying this, by the way, there is a factual error in your thing. Methodological nationalism is not something that Anthony Smith talks about. What he says that there is a substitution between the idea of the nation state and the society. Methodological nationalism is something, in sociology it is Chernilo. There is his last name. If you type Chernilo and methodological nationalism, you will find it. So you have to say, because if you feel a sense of unease, and by the way, I'm not saying it as a negative thing, having a sense of unease is actually productive. So if you feel a sense of unease, then you have to, because this is part of your thinking, so if you are saying that, okay, agar ye nahi hota to wo hota, then you tell us what is it, and then we can, or I can reformulate, I can revise, I can reform if there is a need. But from the way you posed, it is not very entirely clear how it would make a difference. If it would, then you please tell us, and I'm open to your fantastic suggestion.
I'm thinking about a bit more.
So my question is about like this evidence and all the subjects of analysis that you had were like they are from a historic time, and I understand your like the way you're making and you're analyzing time also within its complexity. But you also mentioned that the remnants of this thought of nationalism and nation states exist in like they continue to exist in contemporary sociology. I just wondered like if you could comment a bit on that, like in what ways are we looking at these remnants in contemporary institutionalized sociological thought?
I would suggest that probably the choice of the word remnants is not proper. So remnants is something like, okay, it is already, something is over, right? A house is demolished and then there is some debris, right? No, I think it is an ongoing thing. Okay? So if you see, when I was in Delhi, Sai Deepak, so he's a contemporary noted historian. India, that is Bharat, right? So if you read his, and I think yesterday or day before yesterday, he had some pieces in newspapers, right? So this is not something which is a matter of past. It is something which is burning right in our midst as you and me talk, or as as all of you are thinking about it. Power knowledge matrix that I'm talking about, it is so ingrained and established. So you see, over a period of 15 years, Vinadas, with much consistency, he describes the violence against Sikh as riots. And this is not an innocent term, because riots is a British term, and the idea, the genealogy of this term is, from the British perspective, that Hindus and Muslims, these are two primordial communities, they keep fighting each other, okay, and only the British would be in a position to maintain peace and calm, okay. But the idea is that these two communities fight against each other. What happened in 1984, it is not two communities fighting each other. There is an involvement of the state. There is an involvement of the politicians, who later on became member of parliament. So this is not riots. The correct word is pogrom. Now you might say that why Vinadas says uses of this term riot is just an incidental thing. No, it is not an incidental thing. It is born out of the colonial episteme, right? Likewise, those of you who know Contribution to Indian Sociology new series, so in 1982 or 83, Frances Robinson wrote an essay which created a lot of responses, and Vinadas was one. And she, her solution was to talk about folk theology, because her point was, Robinson was talking about formal, textual, Sharia-oriented thing, and Irfan Ahmad was talking about day-to-day customs, practices, intermingling, right? So Robinson is Sharia, theology, and Irfan Ahmad is about folk. And she wanted to move away from this and bring this category of folk theology. But my point is, what is the terrain of this folk theology? You know, she also talks about original home of Muslims. Okay, she also talks about a tension between Sufism on the one hand and Sharia on the other. These are all part of Orientalist historiography. In short, I would say that no, this is very much part of our present, and the job of a scholar, or at least I do not consider myself as a prophet, so I cannot predict, I mean, you know, no philosopher ever predicted the fall of the Berlin Wall, and yet it did, you know. So scholars or sociologists are poor in that sense. But if, with some risk, if one can say this is probably not simply our present, but it is probably also our future, I don't know how long.
Thank you, sir. I really enjoyed your presentation. I have a question.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Sir, I am Rajat Kumar, doing PhD from this department. My question is related to production of knowledge. So the process of knowledge production invariably involves selecting some claims and rejecting some claims. That's the very innate feature of knowledge production. So how do we move beyond this? Like, and I'm with you. Like the people you mentioned, I'm not like they shouldn't be absolved of the charges that you make. I think they're very important. But how do we move like beyond it? Because we will reject some claims and select some claims, and the question of power also comes. So the powerful people or the Hindus may be able to assert their claims better than others. So, and another question. So I'm not an expert on nationalism, but the project of nationalism, I think, is exclusionary. by its very nature. And whatever I have read on state, I think most anthropologists also, I think, will say state is evil. Many, I think. So it is exclusionary. It is in a way. So how do we like move beyond these things, like the philosophical underpinnings of these concepts?
Yeah. So I think the first thing would be that do we recognize that there is a problem? If everything is happy and excellent, then the labor of thinking, then the work of drawing out a blueprint for the future or an alternative program will not simply arise. So the first and the foremost thing is that we have to recognize that there is a problem. And once we take that a step, this will enable us, and by the way, I'm not a fan of an approach which might be described, for a lack of better phrase, heroic thought. I think thinking is also a collective enterprise. You see Wittgenstein's formulation that knowledge is also acknowledgement. So when you read a book's acknowledgement, it also shows the kind of community of scholars that we have engaged with. So the first point would be recognition of the problem, and then the work of or the labor of thinking, not simply as a so-called heroic intellectual or solitary heroes, but something which is done in collaboration, in partnership. By the way, if you are giving a talk in Dhaka, in Bangladesh, never use the word collaboration, because that is a dangerous word in Dhaka. You know what I mean? I mean, in the neoliberal academia, we always talk about collaboration, collaborator. The word collaborator will land you in Dhaka, in contemporary Dhaka, in jail. So thinking in concert, right? Now the second thing would be that once we do undertake that enterprise, and in my view, I think we have not paid sufficient attention to that idea of ANTE, national, because anti-national, like something which preceded the nation, right? All we can say with full certitude. You remember, some of you might have read this book by Eugene Weber. It is called Peasants into Frenchmen. Okay, not Max Weber, but Eugene Weber. You know the joke about Jaipal Shastri? So you see, the intellectual from third world, for some reason I don't like Shakespeare. I read some of his stuff, but it never inspired me. But in the Muslim world, he is appropriated as that, look, actually he was one of us. But these British, they stole him from us. He was actually Wali Muhammad Shakespeare. And then they turned him into William Shakespeare. Okay? And the same thing is about Jean-Paul Sartre. So actually he was Jaipal Shastri. And then the French stole and then turned him into Jaipal Shastri. But the point is that if we, so what Eugene Weber tells you is that the three, so people in France in 17th century who were living in villages, they did not consider themselves as French. There was no idea of being a French. So therefore, the title of the book is Peasants into Frenchmen. If you live in a small village, you would think, or people would know you as daughter of a carpenter, or the son of a milkman, or he is from across the mountain. right? These were but three institutions pivotally changed those peasants into Frenchmen, right? My late mother, she did not have any idea of the nation state. I mean, there is an idea of Hindustan, but that Hindustan is not like a nation state. So it is not that the people do not have the idea of place or a space. So what happens, Eugene Weber tells you that it is through the army, education and media. These three institutions transform these peasants into Frenchmen. Now I think and I have to really work on my pronunciation, how I can pronounce ANTI and ANTE as different. So the whole idea of anti-national, the one which precedes the nation, is that you had multiple modes of belonging, multiple modes of affiliations, right? One flag, one nation, one community, one religion, one culture. These are already seeds of violence, and history tells you that it has unleashed terror. Stalin's terror is one example of it, right? So
if there are any other questions, we can club the three questions together. Any other questions? Just 1 second, after Dushi, then.
Baker calls us to do so. And my second question is about your distinction between human and man. So for a discipline like sociology or anthropology, is human even a subject matter? Because again, we are studying society in terms of the differential power dynamics and social relationships, which go through the lens of different social identities that we have acquired growing up. And being human has sort of a spiritual element to it. It is something like a utopia that we are striving towards, of being equal and recognizing ourselves at the core that we are human beings. So is this distinction between being human and man as a subject matter relevant to the discipline of sociology? These concerns.
Any other questions?
Okay, so your name was Firoz, right? Yeah. So you see, the idea of India has several sources. Now, you remember the programmatic essay that Dumo wrote with David Pocock while inaugurating the contribution to Indian sociology. And he said that the idea of Indian anthropology or sociology has to be based on the idea of Indology. Now, how many of you have read Homo Hierarchicus? It is a fat book, right? So this is interesting. Indology as a discipline, okay? It is in 19th century it was much more prominent in France than in Germany, and of course Britain. Now, what is Indology? Indology, so you see, many people do not see the connection between Indology and anthropology. So anthropology is the discipline to study the other which is primitive and backward. And Indology, so this is also a Western discipline. Indology is a Western discipline to study that other which is not entirely primitive. Okay? Now, if you step outside of India, Orientalism in the case of Middle East, Orientalism is the study of people who have written culture. Anthropology is the study of the people who do not have written culture. It was known as whatever, the primitive, the other culture, the pre-literate, pre-urban, and all this kind of thing. So the way Indology, so Indology is that particular discipline devoted to the study of Hindus. But even there, it is not the contemporary Hindus. Indology always disliked contemporary India. So there was a famous Dutch Indologist called Gonda. Now there is a fellowship named after him. And Gonda used to write so lovingly about, so it is all about glorious Indian past. And this was based on textual thing, which is itself is a Western enterprise. So Gonda, and I spent some time in Leiden also, so Gonda was based there. And Leiden University itself is a seat of Orientalism. Especially Brill would publish a lot of books, which in India it was published by who? Motilal Banarsi Das. Right? These are all Indological books. So he didn't like contemporary India, so somebody asked him, have you visited India? Because you write about ancient and glorious India. And he said that actually I don't want to visit India. Because all the image that I have, I know that when I walk on the streets in India, those images will be demolished. Or it will not be 100% true. Okay, so Indology as a discipline has a particular idea of what India is, which is based on the textual Brahmanical sources, not about lived India. Okay, and that is why if you read, if you get time, I would suggest that you read this wonderful book by Asif Mannan. It is called The Loss of Hindustan. Okay, and there he makes this interesting distinction between the idea of Hindustan and the idea of India. So the idea of India is furnished through this category or through the disciplinary formation of Indology. Okay, the idea of Hindustan is much more heterogeneous. It is much more multilingual. It is much more multicultural than the idea of India as supplied by Indology. Right? Now, I have not done enough work about Ambedkar. But I do have some knowledge about Ambedkar, especially the book that he wrote in 1946, I think, about partition. And while he was still alive, that book underwent many editions. And the political condition of that time was so volatile. So Ambedkar is also responding to the situation, right? So many people can find. You will find some comments which are quite favorable to the tribes or to the Muslims, but Ambedkar also has some other comments which may not be that friendly. Okay, what from the perspective of this talk that I have given, my biggest criticism of Ambedkar is that what is needed is not, or something that he did not say anything about, or probably, no, there will be a big claim which I cannot substantiate because I have not read every pages that he has written. But let's say it is good to write annihilation of caste, but he probably never thought about annihilation of nation and nationalism, because caste as a social institution from 19th century onwards is part of the nation state. Okay, and so I think annihilation of caste would be possible or much more effective when there is something like an annihilation of nation thinking. You see, Gellner probably at one point of time he made what is the name of this guy who used to be the editor of Indian Express? Shekhar Gupta. Now he writes a column which is called National Interest. And he thinks that he is doing a great job. Okay? So if I tell you that, look, I'm doing something in the national interest, you do not have anything to counter, because it is the national interest. So Gilner's point was that our thinking has become such that national passes as rational. Okay? Or when something wrong happens in America, Obama would come and say that we all are Americans, as if this is the ultimate word. I mean, in any case, the idea of American exceptionalism itself is a violent idea, right? It is also deeply Christian in the sense that city on the hill and so on and so forth. It is a missionary idea, which is, and you know, the missionary idea has only two options, either conquest or annihilation, right? As it happened with the Native Americans. So the point is, from the perspective of this talk, annihilation of caste would be much more effective if it is also accompanied with some thinking about the nation and nationalism, because the caste, at least from 19th century onwards, itself is enmeshed. Do you know this Telugu writer? She wrote a book which was quite famous, but she did not get much attention here, and now she is working as a conductor in New York. Right? Right? So what is she saying there? That even this concern of Gandhi about Dalits is implicated in the number game, in mathematics. If it was not democracy, which is another way of saying numerical superiority, 51, then probably you wouldn't have those talks about upliftment and so on and so forth. So anyway, this is not. This is my non-expert answer.
Because in fact, the Dalit critique at independence was precisely this. It was a skepticism about independence. So it was precisely saying this, that what is this imagination of the new nation when we are not going to be free? Will Dalits be free? So in fact, Ambedkar was in fact addressing this very issue by being skeptical. So it's not as though there wasn't a skepticism about a nationalism. I mean, but that's another kind of debate which but we can.
But Professor Janki, just one word. I think I sometimes get. I mean, there is a rhetoric of inclusion, not simply about nation, but in working of organization and so on and so forth. Right? We have to be inclusive. So, of course, on the face of it, we cannot object to it. Okay? Right?
Object to being inclusive?
Yeah. It is a nice idea. But what I don't feel comfortable with, not with the idea, but I think most violence and discrimination and domination in the last 60 or 70 years have been done in the name of inclusion. Okay, and the question is, of course, inclusion, but inclusion on what term? So it is just like, for example, integration or inclusion. So inclusion would at least assume, mathematically speaking, two entities. There is A, and then here is B, and B needs to be included here, right? But what is this A? Who has made this A? And why you mention about, nobody talks about men being included in the Indian nation. We talk about Dalits being included in the Indian nation, tribals, but why nobody talks about men being included in the Indian nation? Because it is so natural, right? So the talk of inclusion, I find it problematic. When Professor Singh died, I wrote an obituary in first post. Sanjay Srivastava. So of course I wrote about him, and also modernization of Indian tradition. I think I will have somewhere here, but let's not go to the text. So JNU is considered as tolerant, inclusive place in those days, right? All secular, cosmopolitan, and so on and so forth. And I said that, well, when I read those sociology books in the class, and in my class probably there were only 1 or 2 Muslim students. The rest were simply students. They didn't need any adjective. We needed an adjective as Muslim students. So of course it is apparently a cosmopolitan, inclusive place. But I wrote my impression, of course this is reflecting back on those student days, that I felt completely excluded in the class. So it is not that somebody is beating me, but when you read this textbook, and my friends are reading, and then I am being described as cause of all the things that have gone wrong with India. So I am being included, or probably this is an inclusion only through the mechanism of exclusion. So I am being, in a philosophical language, I am being asked to be part of a nation state from which I have been constitutively set apart.
But I wanted to say that politically, and especially from the moment that we are in right now, isn't it politically better to build alliances with the several groups in this nation, which are totally peripheral to the imagination? I mean, our students from the northeast, our students who are Dalit, our students who come from rural backgrounds, each of them feel like that in the classroom, actually. They feel like this sociology doesn't speak to our everyday lives. They feel like, where are we in the syllabus? Like our Northeast students are constantly saying, I think there are 1 or 2 readings that are on the Northeast. Or Dalit students, but really about the experience of Dalit students. So I think that politically maybe the project is of building bridges. To think, because one of the things in this presentation, and I could hear this whisper that, M.N. Srinivas isn't just the Hindu scholar. M.N. Srinivas today it's highly Brahmanical, right? So that critique, although there are whatever. So it's not, so let us not also homogenize the Hindu, which is the project of the current movement, to efface those huge fault lines and erasures, as because you were talking about those erasures.
No, that is why I also use the term actually in the paper, Brahmanical Hinduism or Brahmanism, right? But my point was that people from Northeast tribes, there are so many in Bihar, these tribal people are called as Pahadiya, like those who live in Pahar. So you have so much, but my point is, of course, they should be included, and they should be, for example, in this case, all these people should be included. But my point is, they should be included in what name? You and me, so I'm not excluding myself. We are saying that no, India is a nation which comprises, hundreds, thousands of whatever, So the call for inclusion is in the name of nation, right? A true nation, a bigger nation, whatever. And I feel uncomfortable, so not just about India. I also have done comparative works. What has happened in China or Vietnam in the name of nation, or in Indonesia, So if you think, I mean, Indian nationalism, then you have the creation of Pakistan. From Pakistani nationalism, you have Bangladeshi nationalism, right? And then Chakmas and others, they may not be feeling comfortable within the Bangladeshi nationalism. So the creation of Bangladesh is actually second partition, right? Or like the Kurdish problem in Turkey. So there is a Turkish nationalism, and then Kurds are making a claim that we should have our own nation state, right? So all these political horizon or dreams is caught up in the language of nation, including those about inclusion. And my point is that I think you see, you know this bird called, there is a bird. Is there anyone from Bihar? You know Gidh? Vulture, right? And Shaheen, which is falcon, right? So the birds, they fly across the nation state. Or maybe the nation state might identify. I mean, the pigeon has been used in World War II as a tool of nationalism as well. But I think many of you, when you were kids, in the time of whether you call it foolishness or smartness, we wanted to fly like a bird, or asking your mother and dad, can we fly, or how can we fly? But if that flying is there, it is not constrained by the borders, right? Now people talk about world cosmopolitan or global civil society, but I don't see one, because historically civil society, I mean from Hegel through Karl Marx through Gramsci, civil society is a concept counterposed to a state. And since we do not have a global state, then how can we talk about global civil society? Right? So my discomfort with the idea of inclusion in the name of nation doesn't mean that I'm a fan of global civil society, because that to me doesn't look notionally solid. But there has to be something, because sometimes I feel very suffocated in the language of nation state and nationalism. Maybe most of the time.
So I
Just
think
one thing I would like to ask you. Is there any contradiction between inclusion into one, I mean under a single umbrella, and side by side presence of multiple identity, multiple cultures can be included into one? Is there any contradiction of being multiple culture, multiple identity, and then claim one nation under one umbrella, in spite of having this presence in difference?
Yeah, so in the language of advertisement, more of the same is described as new. So the word new is very distinct in the language of advertisement. After every 1 year, Colgate or Pepsodent will say new, right? So it is more of the same, but presented. I mean, I'm not saying that all the ingredients, and I'm not a scientist to even probably name what goes into the constitution of that toothpaste. But something like more of the same is presented as diversity, right? Well, on the face of it, you might see that actually it is diverse, but people used to make a distinction like between form and substance. But is there a diversity in substance? If I want to go and buy toothpaste in a supermarket, and there are like whatever, Colgate, Pepsodent, Forhans, and so on and so forth. But if there is no Datman there, you see these Biharis, they have the twigs from the bamboo. But if you are presenting me only 4 versions of the toothpaste, but no the bamboo, not the twigs.
Neem, I think. Neem, no, that.
Neem is more effective, healthy. But in Bihar, you know, bamboo, बांस का जो पतला होता है ना, उससे जो twigs from bamboo. I used to do it as a kid. But there are very few supermarket where you can find it, right? So in the name of heterogeneity or multiplicity, sometimes more of the same is presented, and therefore I think the distinction between the formal and the substantive is important. I mean, Vasudev Kutumbakam. You have a slogan on the one hand, and you see a citizenship law, right? And sometimes you wonder, like, oh, the whole earth is a family or kutum, but right here in front of you, you know. So that is what I mean, like in the language of, through the language of inclusion, or in the name of including, you have operation of exclusion.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's move to our JP stall.
Thank you. I really